On episode 22 of Galaxy Tenants, we head to Taos, New Mexico for a conversation about Earthships with Jonah Reynolds. As well, we feature a couple of songs from Joe Russo in the following order: Molly and Annie and Wow Signal. We hope you enjoy.
I'm here with Jonah Reynolds. Thanks for joining me and nice to meet you.
Yes, good to be here.
So can you tell me a little bit about what an Earthship is and kind of the history behind Earthships?
Well, an Earthship is a completely off-grid building. It doesn't use any fossil fuels for residents, commercial, any type of a building. And it's in rhythm with the it's in sync with the natural rhythms of the planet. That's why we're able to provide enough electricity, enough water, cool enough, warm enough. It grows food. We, recycle materials, all those things. And it didn't really happen through trying to be an environmentalist, trying to, save the planet or anything like that. It was strictly out of logic. Does it make sense to burn fossil fuels? It doesn't. Does it make sense to use all these resources, these finite resources of the planet? It doesn't. Does it make sense to have these buildings made of thin little walls that require all this piping in of systems? It doesn't. So the Earthship naturally evolved through that logical thinking into something that happened to make us eco or green or environmental or anything like that. And so now we have a building that we can put anywhere on the planet, any climate, Alaska, Mexico, Europe, anywhere, and it will maintain 70 degrees, 3 feet off the ground. You'll have enough electricity to do anything, big families, small families, whatever, so that people who live in them, they can come in and turn the lights on and not even have to think about the environment. They can just be whoever they are, photography, politician, whatever it is. So it really sets people free, and it's a fun process to see it evolve, and we're kind of just following it,
Mm-hmm. What's the history behind this? When did Earthships kind of start? When did the concept come about, and who came up with the concept?
So my father's an architect from the University of Cincinnati, and was kind of always interested in the alternative, not the same old thing. And so he fell in love with the sunsets in Taos, New Mexico, and was trying to avoid getting drafted to go to Vietnam. So he was teaching in Taos, New Mexico, and it's an artist community, and incredibly beautiful, a lot of eclectic people and everything, and provided the freedom and the latitude to really experiment. And so it was just kind of one thing led to another, where I grew up in a lot of very strange buildings that were too hot, too cold, not enough electricity, too much, all these things that today are designed so they all kind of work normally, quote unquote. But it was just a lot of experimentation with buildings, and him and his crew over the years, since 1969, evolved these buildings into something that could be, so that we can have clients, so that we can actually have customers that would buy them. And, permitting and all that kind of thing, because off-grid buildings in the past didn't fit into the codes. Now they do, of course, and everyone wants them to. So it was just over, since 1970, a lot of evolution and trial and error that he, being in Taos, New Mexico, the Southwest, which is, where straw bale and adobe and all this not necessarily came from, but really evolved from, and had the ability to basically experiment, and
Sure.
and evolve it.
Sure. Now, there's only, as far as I understand it, there's only certain regions that allow this sort of building at current, right? Is there sort of a movement towards increasing that? And what are the regions that are most conducive, permitting-wise, for Earthships?
Right. So in the past, yes, it's been certain places where there's been a more progressive, I guess, attitude toward building codes and all that. So yeah, it's been a I guess a battle, if you will, over the decades about getting things permitted. But it's always been a county by county thing, province by province. So the local building department, the local building inspectors really determine what can and can't get permitted. But that's in the past. Now, especially with the state of the world and fossil fuels and a great awareness of treating our planet and each other better, it's pretty much easy to get an off-grid building, Earthship or other, permitted anywhere in the world. There's a few spots, Ventura, California, Pima County, Arizona, where it's strict, where instead of rammed earth and tires, it'd probably be concrete. But concrete is still thermal mass, so it would still work much better than a conventional building. But specifically to your question about getting a permit, that's 10 years ago is when it pretty much became easy everywhere. It's just you got to have an engineer to stamp it, to stamp the drawings. You obviously have to meet the codes, but Earthships are designed to not only meet them, but they exceed them. So, engineers and architects and building departments and inspectors, they all look at it and it's like, yeah, of course, here you go, no problem.
That's great to hear. I'm so glad to hear that, because I didn't have that understanding of it. Can you talk about the basic materials that are used kind of across the board when it comes to building Earthships?
The main building component is rammed earth and tires. That's the temperature battery. Rammed earth holds temperature very, very well, and it's super strong. So the walls are very thick. So it's mainly rammed earth and the tires, which are literally everywhere on the planet, and we've been everywhere on the planet. And then it's cans and bottles, which are interior non-load bearing walls, which are again everywhere on the planet. And we've been on tiny little islands, 1,000 miles east of mainland India after the tsunami, and there's plenty of tires, bottles, and cans. And then recycled materials. So, for example, we recently did a job in Florida, outside of St. Pete, and we would go to, there's a lot of development there. We would go to a lot of the other conventional developments where they're building 100 2x6 frame homes, pieces of junk, really, and incredibly wasteful. So we'd either talk to them or just hit the dumpsters and get a lot of materials, So between that, the Habitat for the Habitat for Humanity Restore stores where they have a lot of recycled materials, windows, doors, and all that. There's an incredible amount of materials that the Western world really wastes, and so you can get 20 to 30% of all your materials that way. But the main building component, the main building materials are tires, rammed earth, bottles, and cans.
That's fantastic. And then you're not being wasteful when it comes to all of the stuff that gets thrown out. Because what ends up happening to a tire otherwise, or a bottle, just ends up probably sitting.
Right, and or goes to a landfill, And then there's smaller things, like we'll take a lot of buildings would have flashing, which is the final layer is metal, just to weatherize it. And so that's a highly intensive material to produce. It usually travels at least 1,000 miles, like your average plate of food. Your average meal travels 1,000 miles. So instead of doing that, we'll hit the landfills everywhere we go. And, of course, there's bottles, cans, plastic bottles, and tires there. But we'll get appliances or car doors or, old cars that are just, all mushed up. And so we'll cut out the sides of the appliances, and we all know what size that is. And then we'll shingle the outside of the Earthships. We'll shingle the outside of the buildings as the final layer. So that's a recycled material. It's not done that often. Here in Taos, we'll do it a lot. It requires a lot more labor, than just a giant sheet of, for example, corrugated metal that you can just put on the roof. But the requirement of more labor is sweat equity, which is the most sustainable thing you can do. Not only are you hiring people, but you're teaching people and you're paying people. And, with the economy, that gets more money out there. And you're not hiring a factory that's who knows where it is. So that's very, very important in sustainable buildings, is to have labor, specifically unskilled labor. So we'll take old car doors and hoods and appliances and cut out the little pieces and shingle, the outside of buildings that way.
It's amazing. It sounds like there's so many materials that could be used for buildings if you just think outside the box a little bit. I want to talk a little bit just about the systems that take place within Earthships, kind of the systems for creating food, the systems for energy. I'm looking at the website right now, systems for clean water, garbage management, and sewage treatment. Just kind of briefly touch on some of those and kind of how those take place.
Right, each system. So there's design principles. So the heating and cooling, it's basically a passive house where the thermal envelope of the building is there's no breaks. There's not even an eighth of an inch of any kind of a break between the envelope of insulation that surrounds the entire living space, and that's essentially passive house. But we have a much higher R value. We have a lot more insulation, and that protects. On the inside of that insulation is all the thermal mass, because thermal mass holds temperature. Insulation prevents temperature from going through it from one side to the other. And so through the front face, the greenhouse, we let in all the sun's energy, right? That energy from the sun, that heat, hits that thermal mass. The thermal mass holds it. A natural phenomena of physics is that heat moves to cold everywhere. That's just what it does. So the temperature of the Earth below the frost line is about 59 degrees all over the planet. Deeper in some spots because it's so cold. But if you can tap into that, then it's much easier to get to the 71 degrees that we all find comfortable from 59, rather than a 2x6 frame box house sitting on the surface dealing with minus 10. So that heat from the sun comes in and hits that thermal mass. That thermal mass is cooler, and it just gets absorbed. It hits the block of the insulation, so it stays inside, and it stores it. So that when at night, usually, when the temperature of the airspace drops, that heat comes out. And that's how it stays warm enough. And then in a really warm environment, like Costa Rica, parts of Mexico, the tropics and all that. And then, you're also dealing with elevation factors, so it can get a little granular. But we wouldn't have any kind of solar gain. We wouldn't have any kind of front face of windows because you don't want to bring in the sun's heat. So we'll just be using the thermal mass, and it stays cool, like cave technology. You still have the insulation. So that's essentially how it heats and cools itself, with no fossil fuels, no machines, nothing. We'll have cooling tubes that would, in really warm environments, where those cooling tubes, the outside of the Earthship is surrounded by a berm of earth, which is thermal mass. And so the cooling tubes, 15 inches in diameter, will bring in the air temperature, the air from the outside, and it can be 120 degrees. That's fine. And then in that greenhouse, we'll have skylights in the top of the greenhouse where there's a lot of heat in the top of the greenhouse. We'll open up that skylight. That heat will come out. It'll just go out into the air, into the outside. That heat takes air with it. That air has to be replaced. The building is so tight, like passive house, like I was mentioning earlier, that air has to be replaced. The only place that can happen is the cooling tubes. So that air gets sucked in from the outside. It travels through the cooling tube, surrounded by all that thermal mass. Heat moves to anything that's cooler. So the heat leaves, and by the time that air from the outside, whether it's 120 or 80, by the time that hits the inside living space, it's cooled down to 70.
Wow.
So with natural convection. So that's how we can cool the building down if it gets a little warm. And these processes keep it at 70 degrees year round, whether you're in, Montana where it's 20 below, or whether you're in, Mexico where it can get 120 degrees. We can maintain 70 degrees 3 feet off the ground anywhere on the planet. So that's the heating, cooling.
That's
the
incredible.
Electricity is pretty much, it's a consistent temperature throughout the house. It feels really good, and when you get into the psychology of it, it's healthy. It's people have healthier attitudes, and that gets into a whole nother thing about how we start to treat people and ourselves.
Sure.
When we're living in a building that has no stress and it takes care of you. There's no utility. Right. So that's the heating, cooling. The electric is fairly conventional these days, and that's just solar panels. Mm-hmm. We generally don't use wind energy because it's moving parts, it'll break. Mm-hmm. And then you got to replace it. So solar panels have no moving parts, and they'll just last almost indefinitely as long as you take care of your batteries and panels. And the technology these days makes for, panels and batteries that just store, that harvest and store so much energy that's it. It's literally more power than you can use. We're getting to the point where you can start to charge your Tesla, your Rivian, your electric vehicles off your power system as well. So the power system is very, very robust, and almost not yet, but I'd say probably in about 4 or 5 years you can start making energy off the full moon, at night. So it's amazing the efficiency of what's happening. Battery technology seems like it's leapfrogging every 4 or 5 months from this brand to that brand. Mm-hmm. Catch water, I just read an article the other day that they say London might run out of water in 4 years, which is insane because they get, I think, 28 inches of rain per year. Here in Taos, New Mexico, where we've developed, we'll get 8 inches of water a year. Our water systems is such that we use every drop of water 3 or 4 times. So just to follow the path of the water, we catch it from the sky, we run it through the roof in something that is not that it doesn't leach out. Everything leaches out to a certain degree, but a nice metal surface like the appliance, the sides of appliances and car doors and all that, they leach off very, very minimal. You can hardly even measure it. And of course, pro panel and corrugated metal is the same thing. I wouldn't do, EPDM or any kind of asphalt or anything. You can't catch water off of that. It's disgusting and bad for you, toxic. So you got to have a good surface. It's guttered. Instead of guttering away, it's guttered into a cistern. And it can be any kind of a cistern. The cisterns can't have sunlight penetrate it, so otherwise the water will grow algae and all that. So generally they're buried. That cistern is at a certain level, so it gravity feeds the filters and the pump, so the pump lasts longer. Pumps don't like to pull water. They like to push it. We have filters and all that create water to do the dishes, to shower, whatever. And of course, potable water, which is an extra faucet at every sink. And again, like the solar panels and batteries, these drinking water filters, which is right now we use a brand called Rio, which basically you can piss in one end and drink out the other. It's incredible. So they work very, very well. And then, you use the water. You take a shower, you do the dishes, whatever it is, sink and all that, brush your teeth, do the laundry, all those normal modern amenities with all the machines, the laundry machine, the dishwasher. And then instead of just going out to the septic tank and out to a leach field, it goes into a contained and lined, like it's lined with EPDM, which is like a wetsuit material. And so nothing leaches out into the ground, which can pollute aquifers. And in places where it gets a lot of precipitation, it can kind of bubble up, and create problems, with fecal matter and all that. Mm-hmm. So all of the wastewater, except the toilet, which I'll get to in a minute, goes into what we call interior botanical cells or gray water planters. And it's basically the Florida Everglades or wetlands contained in a planter. And it's not like none of these systems are patentable, are trademarkable, are invented. It's just Mother Nature doing its thing, and we dovetail with it. So the planters, and we know what plants to put in there to establish a system to start treating the water and oxygenate it, transpire the water and the oxygen and everything. It's just and then once the system is established, you can start putting food, which I'll get to. And you know, we have solar powered recirculation lines and all these things because we've been doing this for a long time, 50 plus years. And so the end result is water that is clear, that does not smell. You can't drink it, but it is basically treated clean water that we then, through a carbon filter also, and peat moss filters, and like I said, all the roots and good bacteria eat the bad bacteria, that water goes into the toilet, which is the biggest water use in any home. So we don't really need to use low flush toilets, even though, you know, you do want to save water, especially here in Taos, where we get 8 inches of rain a year, which is an intense desert. You know, the example I gave of London, it's just insane when I hear that. But they're just pumping huge amounts of water out of the ground, out of these aquifers, and lowering the aquifers and causing all kinds of problems. You know, Costa Rica gets 12 feet of water in 6 months. The other 6 months, there's no rain, and they run out of water, you know, because everyone's pumping it out, and they're just using it and putting it into the ground and polluting their aquifers. So the toilet flushes with gray water that is clear, you know. Our definition that this is getting into some of the codes things that we talked about earlier is our definition of gray water is treated, as I just outlined. Conventional codes and regulations of gray water is straight out of your sink. So that's the education process that we have to do with these building departments and health departments and environment departments and to some degree politicians, so they can be like, oh, okay, I get it now. Here's your permit. When you just go there and say gray water, there's no way. That's nasty stuff. And all these other builders and designers and architects, which every architect should be sued because of the state of buildings in the world. It's absolutely horrible. Hurricanes come by, wipes everything out. We're better than that, which, you know, maybe we'll get to talking about. But so all these kind of conventional buildings that are trying to do these contrived environmental things, they're just using gray water and putting in a tank, and it's just getting nastier and nastier and trying to do something with it. We're trying to reinvent the wheel, you know, all these conventional designers, whereas Mother Nature's got it. We just got to basically shut up and listen, you know, and slow down and look at the rhythms of nature. It's all there for us, you know. Nature provides, kind of a thing. So the toilet flushes with water that you did the dishes in, that you took the shower in. And we're eliminating the biggest water use of any home, from fresh water, you know, potable water, which in the amount of time that we've been talking, what's it been, like 25 minutes? I think every 5 minutes, 30 kids die from lack of access to potable water in the world. Right. It's insane. And here we are flushing and you'll probably want to edit this out, flushing our shit into potable drinking water, right? And we call ourselves civilized, you know? It literally keeps me up at night. So the toilet flushes with the gray water, right? Recycled water that is clear, not sterile, but clear. You can't smell it or anything. And in the Western world, we have to be able to flush it away and not think about it. And, you know, back in the day, we did dry toilets and compost toilets, which do not work. But in order to have clients and, like, you know, a normal construction architectural firm, which we have, you got to have a flush toilet. That's just the way it is. So that toilet flushes out into an exterior botanical cell. The exact same thing. It's a planter lined with EPDM, wetsuit material, planted, you know, big rocks in the bottom, small rocks, dirt. And this is where it gets into, you know, which is not us, even though these planters make us look like we know what we're doing with plants and biomes and all that. We figured it out through trial and error about how to treat water. And, you know, we can grow food now, but we bring in botanists and have people on our staff that are food experts and plant experts that will tell us, oh, this plant throws down roots fast to get the system established and creates the good biome in there and all that. So then that exterior botanical cell treats the water just like the gray water, and then that water at the end of the exterior botanical cell will, same thing. It's clear. It does not smell. And so that water, while we can't bring it back into the system under today's world, and you're fine putting this in your podcast, we've done it ourselves so that just to know where our limits are. And we've distilled it, we've evaporated it, catching the evaporation, condensed it, and that's sterile water. So we know where those limits are, but for customers and clients and all that, and where the public is going to use it, the exterior botanical cell can then just be top watered on things or go into a leach field, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not going to pollute anything because it's already clear and has it has a little fecal and E. coli, and we've tested it, and it is lower levels than what you'll find at your most organic, healthiest, food stores, Wow. And it's less because everything has that on it. So we've tested it. So that's the catch water system through the roof, and then the wastewater system and how we treat all wastewater on site. Again, these buildings are completely off grid, not just what the conventional definition of net zero, which is only about power. There's nothing connected to these buildings and nothing that goes out. And then so that naturally leads us to food, right? So these planters, and again, we're in the desert. You can Google and look up pictures of what Taos, New Mexico looks like. It's a desert. It is barren. You got to make sure you drink enough water because it's, you're surviving in a desert. It's not like, London or Oregon or especially Costa Rica where it's easy, comparatively to create these systems and buildings. And, so we'll have these planters on the inside, which creates humidity. You're basically a mohawk of Costa Rica. It is lush. I've grown basil with bark, a 2-3 inch thick stalk of basil, where normally it's these little spindly things, We'll be harvesting bananas and papayas when it's 10 below outside in a driving winter storm here in Taos. Our staff in our company is like 30 to 40 people. Our food botanists, horticulture experts, and we have a lot of buildings, and we'll have nightly rentals so that people can experience this. We've built a lot of buildings over the years, like I was saying earlier. Some are really funky, but they work good enough now. And then we'll have our normal modern Earthships. In all those buildings, we have a lot of planters, right? They have to be maintained and managed, which we can talk about in a little bit about maintenance. And so there's a lot of planters, a lot of square footage of planters, therefore a ton of food. I don't know if that's literal, it could be. But and so our food experts will every Friday make us lunch for 30 or 40 people. And Einstein always said, the living enzymes, if you can eat that, you're going to live forever. And so all this lunch that we have is living food by the time it gets into our stomachs and everything, because they'll pick it Thursday and the first part of Friday and make these amazing, lunches for us. No animal products, it's all plant-based, but they're going mushrooms and everything. It's absolutely incredible. Bananas, papayas, nasturtium leaves. It's absolutely incredible. So you get an expert in there, and we'll get into the local farmers markets and all that. But so there's it's a natural byproduct is the food production, right? You don't have to grow food, but your plants in these systems are going to go crazy. They're going to go berserk. So you really have to kind of keep them cut back. If you don't, it's we'll get giant beards of food kind of a thing.
What a great problem to
get
have.
In. It is. It's great. And, you'll have good bugs and butterflies, and, some of our larger Earthships and larger planters will have birds, and then, on the outside planters where the toilet goes into, these plants love our skin, our pieces of skin that come out in the shower, our hair, our, even the dirt and grime from our bodies, especially the glycerin. Food, soap is a really pure food for plants. You shouldn't really put too much chemical stuff, but this biome, this environment is so strong that it can deal with a little bit. You don't want to just pour bleach down or use all the conventional hardcore chemicals all the time. So that's why it makes us, as well as someone who is strictly not environmentalist, like the example I was giving earlier, they just want to come in, turn the lights on, and not even think about anything environment, which is fine. It makes us and all these people look like we're environmentalists or amazing food growers. I personally believe that it's the responsibility of architects and designers to create buildings for everybody, and they don't have to think about anything with the building. Like I said, they come in, turn the lights on, throw the TV on, whatever it is they do, and they shouldn't have to worry about anything else, and that's what these buildings do. Conventional buildings do not, and they're horrible, and we're very passionate about this. When we see disasters, how can we call ourselves civilized when we have buildings that are not only, you got to sign a document that says there's these toxic chemicals in there from the carpets and the paints, but every hurricane, every earthquake, every little storm will knock out power or totally destroy a neighborhood. How can we live with ourselves? How can we let architects and designers continue to build these just piece of junk buildings? It's terrible. And it's absolutely horrible. So those are the systems. That's the food and everything. And then we like to look at the materials as kind of a system. And so, like I was talking earlier, humans are the only species on the planet that have something called garbage. It's a strange phenomena of garbage, of waste products, of landfills. In this tiny little town of about 12,000 people in Taos, New Mexico, there's a giant landfill. Every day there's a streaming line of 20, 30 vehicles loaded with stuff. We've been to tiny little islands on this planet, like way, way remote, where they've never seen Caucasian people stay overnight there. And here we are, a bunch of Western world hippie-looking people burying trash into the ground. Ultimately it looks like, it's rammed earth and tires, and it becomes a structure, and then they see what we're doing and we work our asses off. But it's trash, and it's available everywhere. So we like to recycle everything. The tops of creosote containers, are, they have these little handles on them. That's a good door handle. Every little piece of insulation, and it's just, you just start looking around, and and personally in my trash, again, I'm a human, I don't throw any paper away at all. So like up in my little storage room, I'll have, by now, halfway through the summer, I got like 20, 30 bags of paper from just the packaging from groceries or all the stuff from our modern society, because I'm going to use that when I have a nice crackling fire in the winter because it gets 20 below here. Not that I need it because I live in an Earthship, but it's nice to have a crackling fire, So those are the systems, essentially, of what makes an Earthship an Earthship.
So a big part of what you guys do too is education. And can you talk about some of the programs and the materials that you guys output to kind of educate people on these processes?
Yeah, exactly. So our whole kind of mantra, if you will, is putting housing back into the hands of the people. Humans are the only species on the planet that can't build their own homes. And there's something very, very wrong with that. There's homelessness, there's poverty. It's again, like the disasters. It's just crazy that there's one person that doesn't have a home, that doesn't have shelter that will take care of them. All the other species on the planet has shelter that takes care of them. So we have books that are by now 30 years old, still light years ahead of any other construction, design, architecture firm, any of it. Any university that, teaches radically sustainable is nonsense. It isn't. And I'm sorry to have a strong statement about that, but we're very passionate about that. It's time to, enough of this bullshit. We have the ability to do this. Not us personally, but us as a species has the ability to teach, not only build and design, but teach this, so that kind of like the New Deal back in the day, or the way we developed the nuclear hydrogen, and hydrogen bombs. It was like no holds barred. We're doing this, whatever it takes, and that's what we need now. We actually, my father did a law called the Sustainable Testing Site Act, where designated land to just go for it and experiment, and no permits, nothing, to create a building that is, totally off grid, that takes care of you. So we put out books about 30 years ago, Earthship Volume 1, 2, and 3, that you can get on our website, earthship.com, little plug there. And it teaches you literally step by step how to mix cement. Unfortunately, you have to use cement. Earthship use a lot less cement than conventional buildings. And from that to, how to do a floor, all the way to the entire structure, the entire building, the entire system, all of it. And we'll get postcards from people. This one building that I always use in my lectures as an example, this couple who was in their 50s bought our 3 books, built their Earthship, and we got a postcard. And that's typically the first and last thing that we'll hear from people. And they're in their 50s, right? I'm 46. And I'm getting to the end of construction. I've built a lot in my life, but I couldn't imagine doing that, even after doing this for decades. So it's very impressive. They're in Indiana. It's a nice big Earthship, and they have no utility bills. They're totally off grid. They're free. Wow. They have no stress, no struggle to live. They don't have to do a 9 to 5. So, and this gets into more of the psychological things, and people are happier. They're nicer to each other when they're living in Earthships. It really does cause you to look at yourself a lot and look at inward, which really sets you free. But built in a building that takes care of you, it doesn't. It sets you free. So we have the books that we did a long time ago, and then we have more kind of robust, granular, operational books. Like this is how you stage a building. This is how it's more intense and more with kind of more step-by-step, easier to follow along. It comes with drawings. We have a school, an actual full-on school, where we have 6 semesters throughout the year here in Taos, New Mexico. We have a few communities. One is 55 acres, literally that steep, about 50 degrees on the side of a mountain, about 55 acres, where we did that to show that, because no systems, no infrastructure can even get up there. And we built it all with our little Toyota trucks, way up on the side of a mountain, totally off-grid, little community. So we'll have students up there. We have another community down in the valley, about 1,000 acres, way out. And then we have our main community, 650 acres on the side of the highway, where it's a community, 650 acres, a lot of buildings, and this is where our headquarters are, where we have a lot of buildings going on, where we have space to spread out with 40 students per semester that come in, and we'll put them to work for 4 weeks. And then we have classroom time. So it's really, really hands-on. We have textbooks, quizzes, we have tests. You graduate from that, and then you can go to the field study, where you can join us in Puerto Rico, where we're doing a community center there, where they've had earthquakes and hurricanes that the entire island loses power and water and sewage treatment, except this little community of Earthships that we're doing. So we bring students in, and they can build these, conventional layout 2-bedroom things for the Western world. And then we'll go to Puerto Rico, where we can really be a lot more effective in helping a lot more people, because the Western world is just trapping itself with codes and regulations and dogma and stigma and all stereotypes and racism.
It's fucked.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the way to say it, is absolutely fucked.
Yeah.
So, which I personally think it's gonna implode on itself and then get better. But there's just too much money involved. And so we have these students that can come by, and they help us greatly because they get a lot of these buildings done, and therefore we can have a lot of more demonstration and example. And then, we have internships and field studies and all these different levels of intensity to teach them. And for some, that's enough. For some, they take that and they go home and they build their Earthship, kind of like the postcard example of the 50-year-old couple from Indiana. Some, very rarely, they will go back home, like in Europe or Australia, which we're partners with, and help them and handhold them, where they want to start a little Earthship company, right? So in Australia, we're partnered with a professor, Martin Freeney, out of Adelaide, who's an incredible, beautiful human being. And we will, whenever we have a job in Australia, we'll partner with him. And we're still helping, because it's not just building a building. It's how do you run an Earthship company, which is an entirely different animal. And it's not just any company, you got to know how to talk about it, because it's still new relatively. And so we're kind of, that's the front line of things, is because we can't do it all, and we don't want to do it all. It's not sustainable. You got to have it. Basically, we're open sourcing everything that we do. It's all Mother Nature. Nobody owns it. So we've been doing this for 50 years, and so we're teaching people how to do this. Teaching people how to build, that's pretty easy, especially with people who don't have the skill. When we have contractors and plumbers and electricians, like Yoda says from Star Wars, you got to unlearn so much more before you can really take it in. The Buddha, the Hindu, they all say our cups are full. We got to empty out the cup. There's no room to get this kind of stuff in. And it really is the way all of our ancestors lived thousands of years ago, relating to the sun and the wind and all these natural rhythms. So that's kind of the basis of our whole Earthship Academy, which again is at our website and all that, where we teach people how to build, how to do this, how to teach it, how to just do lecture circuits on it, and then how to do a business of it. And then, we'll get into policy, and we've worked with various politicians on their affordable housing platform, or getting into poverty and how to solve that. And because not to sound egotistical or anything, but poverty, homelessness, that can go away very easily.
It's so unnecessary.
And we have the solutions.
Yeah.
We just need the ability and to let go of all this dogma and nonsense.
So can you fill me in a little bit about maybe what it costs to build an Earthship, and then also maybe what it costs to purchase an Earthship already built, if you were to just walk onto the site? And I also want to say, we come down to Taos quite a bit from Denver, Colorado, and the community down there is absolutely beautiful. The impression I've gotten just the aesthetics of the buildings, a lot of them look kind of like what I have seen in Dr. Seuss books. And there's something that is brilliantly beautiful about these structures and buildings. But yeah, I'm curious as to the cost to build and then the cost to purchase.
Sure. Yeah, we get the Dr. Seuss thing a lot. We also get the Star Wars thing a lot, which I love, because I was born in 1973 and big Star Wars fan. And they're amazing. I mean, I was, Michael Reynolds is my father. I was born into it, but it's a beautiful blessing to even know about it, let alone be in it and and this community of people that we have. It's a lot of fun and a lot of big challenges. So the cost of building Earthships are generally the same as a conventional building. I mean, it's good to, build new buildings, but the most sustainable building is the building that's already built. So it's really about retrofit. If we're going to make a really big difference in the world, we have to retrofit, which again, from our perspective, because we've been doing this for so long, is easy. All this is easy to really make a dent in homelessness and poverty, and which is systemic and affects so many other things, racism. And our society is just geared toward keeping some people down and bringing some people up. So anyway, the cost is right around the same, but it's hard to compare because it's really in the finishes. Finishes are expensive and you can go really crazy with it. But if you have a conventional building that is simple, radically simple, and Spartan, it's going to be the same basically as an Earthship that is radically simple and Spartan. That's the initial construction cost, right? You got to look at the true cost of the building. What does it take to operate that building over the lifetime of the building? A conventional structure probably won't last, especially the conventional buildings that are built today, probably won't last a lifetime. The conventional buildings that were built 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, they'll last because they're built with earth-type materials. And it's a completely different attitude toward building. There's a lot more care and intention and craft with it. So that's a big difference. Today's day and age of, making money and consume, and building like American Homes, which is a company that builds just piece of junk, 2x6, 2x4 framing. They build, like 100,000 homes in a year. They're not going to last a lifetime. So the true cost, an Earthship is about 30 times cheaper than a conventional home, because there's utility bills, there's the constant maintenance, the constant rundown, the constant replacing of all these conventional homes, not to mention the pollution, not to mention all the fossil fuels, and on and on and on, So that's where the true difference really happens. An Earthship is going to last 1,000 years, at least, So that cost of building new buildings is completely removed. That cost of utilities is completely removed. That hit on the planet is completely removed. So by far, they're way cheaper, right?
Right.
So that starts to affect society and neighborhoods and countries and all that. And then so that's the cost of building, the true cost of the operation of the home. And there's maintenance. Earthships cost a lot less and a lot less maintenance to do, because the maintenance is really about the Earthship, the building, maintaining the human. So there's more maintenance happening of maintaining the human than the human maintaining the building, right? And what little maintenance there is of, cutting back plants and gardening, getting your fingers and your toes into the dirt, touching your plants, there's microbes that gets transferred. And that actually has a better effect than antidepressants, pharmaceuticals. So you're really not just maintaining your building. You're taking care of yourself, which gets into the psychology of it and the removing the stress and the struggle to live. You want to check your batteries for if you have non-lithium batteries, where you have distilled water in them. That's not much. Ideally, it's a good idea to at least look at them every month, but you're probably going to be pouring distilled water into them tiny bit once or twice a year, if that. But if you're using a ton of power, yeah, you're going to be checking that water more often. But if you're living normal, and that's a wide range of normal, it's maybe once, maybe twice a year. Solar panels, if you get a lot of snow, you're going to go out with a push broom and just push them off. But New Mexico, we get over 300 sun days a year, so it's going to melt, more, and you're not really going to have a storm that's too long. Probably Denver, Colorado, maybe it's a little bit less sun days up there. Maybe, there might be some dust. That probably once a year you might want to clean off your panels. If you're in a place where there's trees overhanging your roof, there might be a little maintenance there, leaves or whatever, but that's not much. That's kind of, normal roof stuff.
These are minimal things relative to what a lot of conventional homeowners have to deal with.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's probably a 10th of the 20th the amount of time and energy and cost in terms of maintaining an Earthship,
sure,
as opposed to a conventional. And then buying a new Earthship is really, that's just comps. That's just, typical real estate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going up every year because Earthships are way more valuable. They're going to take care of you. They're never going to be a total loss, in any kind of disaster. It's not going to be a total loss.
Right.
We've had Earthships go through 8.0 earthquakes in India. When we did the disaster relief thing there after the giant tsunami on the 2005 or 2010, whatever it was, on Christmas Day or something, we went there and built an Earthship, small, non-Western world. And that Earthship has been through, I think, 4 8+ earthquakes. And, some of the plaster might crack. But the rammed earth it's basically rammed earth encased in steel belted rubber bricks. None of that cracks. And It's 2.5 feet wide. A 2x6 framed wall is 5.25 inches wide on a concrete footing. A rammed earth tire is 2.5 foot thick. It doesn't need any footing. It's strong. It can take way more weight than any concrete can. So we don't need any kinds of footings. So it's going to adjust and float and take care of all that vibration from an earthquake, right? We've had Earthships go through giant forest fires that just sweep right over them. Dirt, rammed earth does not burn, right? Rubber in a tire doesn't burn. It'll burn like, and we don't have them anymore. And for all you youngins out there listening, there are things that we used to have, giant thick books of phone numbers, but they're big books. You take a lighter to it, it's not really going to burn. It's the same concept with a tire, but a tire's rammed with earth. So it's it might be a little singed. When you just have a giant pile of tires, there's a lot of oxygen and all that, and they'll burn, and it's a problem. And by the way, when you put tires in a landfill, they tend to float up. So we've had Earthships go through forest fires, earthquakes, hurricanes, which they're super, super strong. So Earthships, the point is, are never going to be a total loss. So fire departments love them. Insurance companies love them. Banks love them because it's a better investment. It's a lower risk. So all these things contribute to an Earthship being more valuable. So we've seen them grow in price. So they can be, depending on where you're at and what kind of insurance company you're working with and what kind of bank you're working with and what kind of owner you're working with, they can be a little more expensive. But sometimes they can be cheaper because there's stereotypes and stigmas still with off-grid green buildings. I'm like, okay, whatever. So that's when you can really get a steal on it, because then you turn around and you have much lower insurance rates, So they're both, really. It depends on where you're at. Here in Taos, New Mexico, because it's not near any really big cities, they're still a little cheaper, But, they're still, because it's in Taos and like with COVID, with Y2K, all these disasters, we get inundated. We can't build them fast enough to sell them. So, and then, people come in and they have additions that we put onto them and they finish them really nice and they sell, and some other owner comes in and that gets into comps with real estate agents. So it kind of ebbs and flows. Some years they're more expensive, some years not. So the answer to that question is kind of both. They're more expensive and less.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen a handful on Zillow, which I thought was interesting that they've started to pop up on there, and so fascinated with the processes and the ability to be sustainable. Coming from living in a conventional home at current, I'm just so fascinated with the Earthships, and so grateful for the work you guys are doing. So grateful for the work your father did to create this thing, this beautiful, beautiful thing that could in ways help save this planet. It's really an incredible thing. And I thank you so much for taking the time and telling your story and talking about these incredible buildings and structures.
Yeah, right on. I'm grateful to talk about it. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to Galaxy Tenants. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts.